let's talk a bit more about the way from the idea to the work. Did she do drawings and sketches? Or
not really. I mean, Louise drew a lot, but the drawings really don't correspond one-to-one to sculpture. There may be a drawing she made 30 years before that the form will look like, but it's not a conscious, very rare, is there that sort of connection.
Did you do models or?
No, there are very little. There's no models. When she did like the turbine hall, those big installations, she had to work with an engineer, and there were models, but no really models at all. It was very intuitive in a strange way. Even with the cell, she'd set up this sort of architecture, and she'd keep moving, making things, putting it here, switching here. I mean, there was, it really was this ongoing process.
We are surrounded by these insomnia drawings, 220 sheets made between, I think, November '94 and May '95. Yeah. Did she at one point say, I just want to sort of make a work about my insomnia?
No, she didn't. There was never anything in advance. I think she just was not sleeping. I mean, she's had insomnia her whole life, and her 2 sons, and so one day I went there and I saw some drawings at the bottom of the stairs. I thought, okay, so I picked them up, and then she came down and she said, I didn't sleep at all, but I made these beautiful drawings. And so the next day I would go there, sometimes there'd be no drawings, but the next day there'd be 2 and 3, and as she was staying up mostly all night, she would be working in her bed, making these drawings. And I just kept them all together, and then there was this idea, to keep them all together as this thing. And then at a certain point, the insomnia got a little better, and then she stopped. And she did not draw at night again, virtually. It was this one particular body of work that was made at night.
What I think fascinating when I look at these drawings is the relation between writing and drawing. I mean, when I went to the studio and sort of browsed through these massive body of paper and written paper and notes, these many notes, I thought, I mean, she actually wrote more than she drew. Can you say something? I mean,
she always recorded. Louise had diaries her whole life. I mean, from 12 years old to the very end. I think the idea of recording how she was feeling, or recording some event or some sort of thought or some sort of reaction to someone she had seen or something. I mean, so the drawings were just another form of recording something, but the drawings could also, in a way, I mean, Louise really felt that she had access to the unconscious, and the drawings were really, at a certain moment, she would slip into this thing and things would come forward in a way that she was not totally in control of. Whereas, the writing is a much more rational kind of thing. I mean, she was much more conscious of what she was writing. She didn't want to forget anything.
But the notes are related to the psychoanalysis she did in a way, or?
Well, some of that were, but sometimes a lot of the drawings beginning in the 80s were annotated heavily on the back. Sometimes she would be explaining the imagery on the back, what it was. I mean, she always felt like, Louise felt her works were psychoanalysis, and I think as she started to show more, she thought, all these interpretations are so off, that she wanted to set the record straight as to what it meant to her. So some of the drawings, it's very clear, this is this means this, and I did this, and so you have that. But in other cases, the imagery, she'll look at it and it will trigger something else, and then she'll record that association in a way. And it is this sort of,
So she went to psychoanalysis for about 30 years, more or less intense.
The concentrated period was after her father died. She got very depressed, and she was in therapy intensely from like 52 to 67. Then she went to Italy and this or that, and then there were breaks, but then when her husband died in 73, she went back again with the same person. So she was in contact, for over 30 years, but sometimes she would go see the therapist once a month, at least according to the diaries we have by the appointments, but it wasn't, the intense therapy was really from 52 to 67.
So the therapist was next to her father and to her husband, the third very, 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 very important man in her life. Would you say that? How did his therapy affect her work? Can you say something like that?
No, I think it helped a lot. I mean, she didn't think it helped as much as I believe that it did in a way. You know, she always said that, you know, when you talk, you could make things up, you could lie, this or that. She thought with a work of art, that was the truth. There was no lying, you know, you talk, you know, it's almost... And I think that she had trouble with, you know, some of the Freudian interpretations and certain of the things he was bringing out, but I think it helped her. I mean, she didn't believe in the talking cure. She thought she had to make a work of art was, you know, was much more helpful to her. I think because she said even making sculpture, it had a certain physicality with the body, which she preferred. Was less totally, you know, intellectual, but it definitely helped her because I see between the drawings and the writings and all that. I think he helped her in a way look at what she had made in a strange way, and her relationship to symbol and symbol formation. I mean, it's sort of. I definitely think it was a positive, and I think she would think it was a positive. It wasn't a cure, not that making art was a cure either, but it sort of helped her get through the day.
Would you say that the death of her father and the depression was a kind of watershed in her work? That she started with these personages, which are very impressive for me. Really sculptural command on abstract expression has been much underrated. And then the father died, and she.
It was almost like in the work, up until basically the 80s or so, the work was very aggressive about cutting things, having to be shoved together, or two contradictory things coexisting together. And I think that had a lot to do with the father. Then at a certain point, I think maybe as she was getting more physically frail, it seemed like everything was about the mother. Working in fabric and the clothes and the sewing and the spiders all connected really to the mother. She hardly mentioned her father. And that's what the psychoanalytic writings really make clear, is that she was really in love with her father. I mean, she was quite jealous of all his other infidelities and in a strange way. And I think, you know, you see this conflict between she took care of her mother who was sick and she was the nurse. On the other hand, she was taking care of her mother so the father could be sleeping with other people. So everything was very contradictory in a way. There was always both sides, you know.
And she had this very special role in her family. She was the chosen one, as you say, always.
Yeah, I mean, her sister was not really that educated. Her brother was not well mentally, so she was, you know, definitely the chosen one. But, you know, the problem is that Louise was extremely intelligent, but her father, this is where the resentment, in a way, her father really did not want her. She said she would not have been an artist had she stayed in France. It was just not in the social family makeup. She would not have been allowed to do that, really. It would have been quite difficult. So she said she was a runaway. She said, I was a runaway, but I was a runaway who made it. She survived in a strange way. But, you know, her father did not want her to, her father didn't like the fact that she was too smart. He didn't think, you know, he wanted her to get married and perhaps continue in the business. But he didn't want her, I mean, she was studying mathematics, and he was like, come on now, you're in philosophy. I mean, he didn't like that.
And he was actually putting her up in a sort of partition of the gallery. So.
That was sort of common. At a certain point, Louise had stopped studying. I mean, well, she got her degree at the Sorbonne in philosophy and mathematics, and then when her mother died, she was depressed. And then she started art. You know, that was sort of, you know, it's not my idea, but this curator has been working on the archive, said it's funny, when her mother died, she went into art. You know, and when her father died, she went into analysis, you know, in a strange way, and how the two are two very different sides to the same personality. But yeah, her father at one point when she was studying at the École de Louvre said, okay, he had a tapestry gallery on the Boulevard Saint-Germain-des-Prés, and she had a little section off, and she was trying to sell little prints and books and little paintings of Bonnard and small things like that. But basically her son had said, oh, her father had, I'm going to put my little pretty daughter in the window and some guy's going to come by and, you know, and find her. I mean, it was like an advertisement. That's what I was told.
I mean,
that's how she met her husband, so it did work. I mean,
and she met Alfred Barr there.
Alfred Barr, yeah. She was.
So Alfred Barr, the other very important person in her life, because she was secretly always in love with him. And when you read the diary, she
had a crush.
Yeah, yeah. But it was not easy to seduce.
Louise
but
had
he
many crushes. I mean, Louise, had lots of. The work is about this relationship to other people. Obviously, to have this crush or this game of seduction or teasing is a turn on.
And then Robert Goldwater came in. This little, for me, it's I'm seeing Louise more like a spider, building up this trap, this little shop, and sort of catching people. And she caught Robert Goldwater.
Yeah, he had come in, and it's funny because this woman who was doing research in Paris with her husband, Robert Goldwater, I had a chance to speak to her before she died, and she was with Robert Goldwater when he met Louise, and she said, he had come back and said to her, I met this incredible French lady, and it was really love at first sight for him. I mean, he was a Francophile, and in a strange way, he was a runaway, because he was sort of, his family situation is somewhat similar, only it was more the mother. I mean, Robert Goldwater was, originally it was going to be, his father was a doctor, so originally he started out a doctor. He didn't want to do that, and then he was going to be an architect, and the mother, then when he said he was going to study art history, his mother was just like, wow, that's the lowest, I'm so disappointed in a way. So they were like two sort of coming from dysfunctional families, and they sort of hooked up together in a strange way. But, it definitely was on Robert's part. I mean, he was love at first sight.
And on her part? Was it just the first chance to get away from?
Well, I think she saw there was a chance to get away, but I think it was also hard for her to leave, the idea of leaving to go to New York. I think on one hand, this was her ticket out, but on the other hand, I think she was very frightened. It was also, he was Jewish, the war was just, there were a lot, it was complicated.
She always said, the biggest fear I have is to be abandoned. And I think you've suffered of this fear. How should you say? Abandonment was
one of her biggest. The idea of being abandoned. Whenever I would go away and do a show, she'd be like traumatized. I never told her I was going until literally I'd be with Louise and say, "Car's picking up in 5 minutes. I'm going to Europe. I'll be back in 3 days." Because if I told her in advance, she would be like hysterical. So I had to tell her, and then. So I could never really travel that much because she,
So that was, would you actually call? Thinking about the trauma. She was dealing with trauma in a way, and it's of course for an art historian like me, because I am an art historian, so I do something very low level. I'm not a psychologist, but would you say that this fear of abandonment is really at the very core, at the very heart of the conflict.
Her memory, her fear of losing. She couldn't throw out clothes. That's why she processed all her clothes. And I think that at the end of her life, she wanted to work with a soft material that she could physically handle. But it was also, I've saved all this crap now. I got to put it in a work of art, so it's not. No one's going to come in after I'm dead and take everything to a dumpster. I think she wanted to preserve. She had this. That was also coming out of that same fear of. She had all the letters, she had all her diaries, she retrieved the letters from her father. She was building, all the work is sort of this archive of her whole life, and she wanted to keep every scrap of it. And everything offered a clue to her life, whether it was a little gift someone had brought her, just brought back a certain story. And so I think there was this idea that she needed to record everything, comes out of the same thing, the fear of abandonment, and particularly by, because she's the one who abandoned her family. So it's sort of like a reverse in a strange way. But I think it was, she didn't like being alone in a strange way. She'd really, when she worked, she liked being alone. But aside from that, I think she'd really, I think it was very painful to be alone. She'd become very anxious.
She liked to work alone, but you were there. What did you do? Actually,
She was working, and I was working on organizing this, or because I was doing a lot of the or she said, "Oh, I need to get this," or
So it's not that you sort of helped her, like.
I wasn't a studio assistant. I wasn't, I don't know how to weld. I don't know how to sew. I don't know how to carve more. No, I sort of just. My role was to keep her calm, to get her what she needed, and I would do the shows. I was sort of. Somehow I like to see myself as an editor. I say, okay, I'm going to do this show, and I'm showing this, and